Here's a question I get asked all the time. Not really all the time, more like sometimes. Here's a question I get asked sometimes. It's not even sometimes. There was just that one comment, I think 8 months ago. Yeah, anyway, here's the question. What is the best engine configuration? My default answer is that there is no such thing. You can have a best engine configuration for a particular scenario, and it's going to depend on that scenario. In other words, what's your budget? How much power do you need? How much space do you have where to put the engine? How heavy can the engine be? How clean must the engine be? How loud can the engine be? How much can it vibrate? And so on and so forth. There are many different factors when choosing an engine configuration. However, let's say I was forced to choose the best configuration. The anatomy that I believe best represents the glory of reciprocating pistons, an ambassador of internal combustion greatness, if you will. If I was forced to choose one, then I have to choose the V12 engine, because no other configuration comes even close to having a comparable blend of power, smoothness, sound, and history as the V12 engine. And in this video, I'm going to prove my point with a random collection of subjectively chosen facts and this box, which houses in it the ultimate presentation aid. But before that, history. The first V12 engine was built in 1904. That's 120 years ago. It was built in London by a company called Putney Motor Works and was used in racing boats, and the engine had a name. It was called the Craig-Dörwald engine. So as you can see, the V12 was high class from day one, because I personally can't think of a more snobby name and application than Craig-Dörwald and wooden racing boats. After getting its feet wet, the V12 decided to skip walking and immediately took to the skies. Credit for the first airborne V12 goes to Renault in France, who very bravely fitted a 90 horsepower 60-degree V12 to a very flimsy-looking biplane in 1912. After this, the V12 decided to finally grace land transport with its magnificent presence. The first famous car with a V12 engine in it was called Toodles V. I'll say that again, Toodles V. If that's not snobby, then nothing is. But the car was a brainchild of a man called Louis Cotaalen, who was the chief engineer of the then famous Sunbeam Motor Company. It was a custom-built race car with a 9-liter 60-degree V12 in it, which made 200 horsepower at 2,400 RPM, and the engine weighed 340 kilograms. Not impressive by today's standards, but very impressive for 1913, which explains why the car broke multiple speed records in that and the following year. From the world of racing and one-off custom builds, the V12 proceeded to the world of luxury. Some of the first production cars with a V12 in it actually came from the United States, a country that is most certainly not associated with V12s today. But back in 1915, the US made cars like the Packard Twin 6 and the National and the Widely, or maybe it's Widely, I don't know. But what's important is that these cars were pioneering a new era of high-end vehicles. The power and smoothness of the V12 proved to be contagious, and the configuration spread like wildfire. Throughout the Roaring 20s and even the 30s, the V12 became the engine of choice for the flagship models of pretty much all the relevant manufacturers of the day. Fiat, Daimler, Maybach, Hirsch, Hispano-Suiza, Tatra, Rolls-Royce, Cadillac, and Lincoln, to name but a few.
Okay, go.
The 1930s soon spiraled into a crisis which culminated in the Second World War. This time of immense destruction and tragedy for humanity was also a time of massively accelerated evolution of engineering and technology. This age gave us some of the most iconic piston engines in all of human history, and most of these engines were actually V12s. Stuff like the Rolls-Royce Merlin, or the Michelin AM308, or the Daimler-Benz DB600, or the Alstom V1710, and various Junkers Jumos. These engines powered unforgettable aircraft like the Spitfire, the P-51 Mustang, or the Messerschmitt Bf 109. After the war, the car industry started recovering bit by bit, and in Italy, a man named Enzo Ferrari still remembered the power and the smoothness of beautiful pre-war V12 engines. So in 1947, him and Gioacchino Colombo decided to build the Ferrari Colombo V12 engine. It was the engine that won many races and put Ferrari on the map. It was the engine that laid out the foundations for everything that was to come for Ferrari. So a V12 is at the very heart of one of the greatest car manufacturers of all time. And the Colombo V12 would actually power many iconic Ferraris well into the 80s. But a man named Lamborghini thought that Ferrari V12s sucked. So what he did is that he hired an ex-Ferrari engineer, Giotto Bizzarini, to build him a brand new V12 for his newly established sports car brand. Bit of a weird logic, but it still led to amazing results. Introduced in 1963, the Bizzarini V12 would power flagship Lamborghinis for the next 50 years. V12s didn't just power expensive flagship supercars, they were also at the heart of the highest class of international racing, Formula One. Legendary V12 engines built by Honda, Ferrari, Maserati, BRM, Matra, and others powered iconic Formula One racing cars throughout the 60s and the 70s. In the 80s, the V12 took a little break, but it came back in 1989 to give us some of the best sounding engines of all time. Interestingly enough, Honda's V12 was the first V12 in Formula One back in 1964. And Honda's V12 was also the last V12 to win at Formula One in 1991 with the MP4. Inside it was a 3.5-liter, 60-degree V12 engine, 14,000 RPM, 6-speed manual, and Ayrton Senna behind the wheel. We may have built more powerful things and faster things. We may have built more efficient things. But we will never build something this breathtaking ever again. Starting with the 70s, many celebrated manufacturers decided to introduce their very own V12 engines. The first one was Jag in 1971. In 1987, it was BMW with their M70 engine, and in 1991, Mercedes responded to BMW with their M120. In fact, V12 engines would become a sort of crowning achievement of internal combustion for both BMW and Mercedes. From BMW, it was the S70/2 in the legendary McLaren F1, while Mercedes M120s, they powered the orgasmic Pagani Zondas. Of course, both Ferrari and Lamborghini continued to give us more V12 masterpieces throughout the years, while more recently Cosworth also decided to demonstrate the full breadth of their talent by introducing two new additions to the V12 family. the Cosworth RA in the Aston Martin Valkyrie, and the Cosworth GMA in the Gordon Murray T33 and T50. These two engines are an absolute spec sheet of mind-boggling and physics-defying numbers which demonstrate what decades of experience and the latest technology can do with the incredible anatomy of a V12. As you can see, the V12 is at the heart of the most illustrious episodes in the long history of internal combustion. It's also inside the engine base of many of the greatest cars and vehicles humanity has ever built. And sure, the global trends of downsizing and emissions reduction and efficiency improvement may be marginalizing this engine, but I'm pretty sure that when the humans of the very, very distant future dig up the fossils of internal combustion, they're gonna put a V12 in their museums to demonstrate what the wasteful and egoistic and greedy humans of the past were capable of when they put their hearts and minds to it. So, that's the history. Now we're going to examine the anatomy of the V12 in detail to see what makes it so great. The minimum number of cylinders needed to achieve perfect primary and secondary balance on a reciprocating piston engine is 6. The Inline 6 is the smallest engine which is inherently perfectly balanced. The Inline 3 has poor primary but good secondary balance. The Inline 4 has good primary but poor secondary balance. The Inline 5 is just like the Inline 3, slightly better but still imperfect. It is only the Inline 6 that achieves perfect balance out of the box without needing balancing shafts, counterweights and the like. A V6 is 2 Inline 3s at an angle. A V8 is 2 Inline 4s. And a V10 is 2 Inline 5s. Which means that none of these engines are inherently perfectly balanced. But a V12 is composed of 2 Inline 6 engines, which means that it has inherent double perfect balance, which is newspeak for, oh my god, you would not believe how smooth it is. You want to balance a coin on a V12? That's easy, that's child's play. Your wristwatch makes more vibrations than a V12. Seriously, though, there's no such thing as double perfect balance. Once an engine has inherent perfect primary and secondary, you cannot really improve it any further noticeable amount. It's perfect already. Yet, a V12 is even smoother than an Inline 6. And it has to do with the firing interval. You may have noticed how in the history section of this video, all the V12 engines we mentioned had a 60-degree angle between the two banks of the V. And that comes from the firing interval. If we take 720 degrees, which is how many degrees a 4-stroke engine must complete before it can do a single combustion event. If we take 720 divided by 12, which is the number of cylinders, we're going to get 60. That tells us that a V12 fires every 60 degrees of engine rotation. It's firing very often. A Inline 6, of course, fires half as frequently. The more often the engine fires, the greater the overlap between individual power strokes, individual combustion events from individual cylinders. And the greater this overlap, the smoother the engine. Now, I'm sure that somebody in the comment section is going to say how the W16 engines, such as those found in the Bugatti Veyron, are even greater than the V12 because they have even more cylinder, so there's even more power stroke overlap, and so it's even smoother than a V12. Well, actually, no, you're wrong, and I'm right, and it's because you can't have too much of a good thing. Because once you start increasing the power stroke overlap and the firing frequency beyond that of 12 cylinders, you enter into an area of very, very diminishing returns. And it is pretty much impossible to detect and feel an improvement in smoothness from a V12 to a W16. And on top of this, the V12 is greater because the V16 is simply too heavy and too cumbersome for most applications. It's 16 cylinders. And it's not just the weight, the anatomy of the narrow angle single block VR Volkswagen thing, which Lancia did before them, never mind. The anatomy of that is not really ideal, which is why a V12 always is going to be capable of revving much, much higher than any W16 engine, and the history of the two configurations doesn't even compare. The W16 doesn't really have much. And now it's time to talk about the sound. And to explain the sound, I'm finally going to open this box, which has annoyingly just been sitting here this entire video. Well, that's the end of the video. It's not coming out. Thanks for watching. And here it is. Whoa, that's kind of heavy. The ultimate presentation aid. A living, breathing, operational, running, miniature V12 engine. And this is not some sort of RC engine, two-stroke thing, whatever. This is an actual 72cc liquid-cooled double overhead cam 48-valve four-stroke engine. It revs to 10,000 RPM and allegedly it makes 3.8 kilowatts, which is around 5 horsepower. I think that's a bit exaggerated, but the power output isn't really why I would get something like this. This is a new and improved, updated, limited run version from EngineDIY.com, and as you can see, just like a real V12, this is not cheap. But I have to say it's really special because it's pretty much a car engine that somebody hit with a shrink ray, and when you have it in person, it feels really kind of weird, like you have an engine from a car miniaturized, because it has everything like an actual car engine. You have the cam gears, the belts, the spark plugs, the cam covers, the distributors, the flywheel, the exhaust manifolds, the oil pump. The oil pump. There's a water pump here as well. There's a water pump. Here it is. It's really authentic, and I have to say, having it in front of you, really unique, really special. What we're going to do now is that we're going to hook it all up with the ignition and the fuel and everything. We're going to fire it up so we can hear how an actual V12 sounds. Almost. I'm thinking about getting rid of this, the air filter. Okay. What?
Okay, that was really fun. Unfortunately, I can't run this for more than like 30, 40 seconds because this is a closed space. I have just a tiny little roof window and the air gets bad really fast and I don't want to die. And I didn't set up the water cooling, so I just do really short bursts. But even during those little short bursts, this thing is incredible, and it really allows us, despite the miniature size, it allows us to experience the full ferociousness and the high-pitched scream of a V12 that we all know and love. And that's why I wanted to use this engine to explain where the sound comes from, because it's obvious that displacement has nothing to do with it. Engine size has nothing to do with it. Of course, it's due to the firing interval once again. That's where the sound comes from. Think about it. We have 12 cylinders. The engine fires every 60 degrees. At 10,000 RPM, which is what this thing can do, the engine is firing 1,000 times, almost, very, very close to 1,000 times per second. That is 1,000 combustion events every second. And that's, of course, this amount of combustion events stacked up gives us this memorable high-pitched howl of a V12. So the firing interval, the other thing that's very important is, of course, the exhaust manifold. This one has a very interesting 6-into-1. Not very typical of a V12, but it gives a sort of interesting sound. It would be really fun to have like a 3D printer and print out different kinds and do 6-into-3, 6-into-2, all sorts of things to see how exactly the exhaust manifold influences the sound. So we explained pretty much everything about a V12, and now it's time to talk about the hidden agenda of this video. The hidden agenda is that in December of 2024, this channel became 10 years old. It reached 10 years of age. And of course, to celebrate that, I want to reward, I want to give back, and I want to give away this very engine that you've just seen run to one of you. But I didn't put it in the video title, giveaway, whatever, or the description, or anywhere, because I want to reward the people that are actually watching the videos and that have been with this channel for a very long time, watching since the early days. And don't you think that I'm not noticing that, and don't you think that I appreciate it immensely, immensely. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask a question, and the first person to answer that question correctly in the comments is going to win this engine. Before I ask the question, a couple of important things. I will ship this at my cost to you wherever you are in the world. I can ship almost anywhere except war zones, maybe some islands somewhere, but almost everywhere I can ship. I will pay for the shipping. However, due to the value of this, I will state that this is a gift, which it is. You want it for free, you didn't pay for the shipping. However, there still might be customs, imports, duties that you will have to go through with this engine. Unfortunately, I cannot mediate there in any way. You will have to do this, and to do it, you either have to be 18 or above, or have someone represent you to do it, or you can just somebody else do it for you. So, something to keep in mind. If you're in the EU, this is not going to be an issue. If you're outside the EU, it might be an issue. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for an amazing 10 years. Thank you for everything. Thank you. That's all I have to say. So here's the question, and after I say it, I'm gonna end the video. The first engine that I built for the Toyota MR2 Mark 1 AW11, what happened to that first engine?